Hello and welcome to the Classical Now. I'm Will Fraser and tonight I'm joined by the flautist, Leslie Newman. Leslie, it's lovely to have you on the show.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Now, how long have you been playing the flute for?
My goodness. Well, a long time. I started playing the flute when I was 6 years old, which is quite unusual for wind instruments, but I started very early, so I've been playing, I won't tell you exactly how long, but well over 20 years.
What is the niche, if you like, for flautists in today's world of classical music?
Well, it's an interesting question. Of course, we're needed and necessary within the orchestra, but outside the orchestra, I would say that you need to be quite flexible because, for instance, a string player may choose to be part of a string quartet or a piano trio, perhaps. There's no one ensemble that a flute could be part of that has enough repertoire that you would be part of one thing, even a woodwind quintet. So I think what we tend to do, or certainly what I found for myself, is that along with solo recitals, flute and piano, you can be involved in a number of different types of chamber music, and of course concerto work as well.
And how does this compare, say, if you're a violinist? Would they be able to just be a soloist or just be in a quartet?
Yes, certainly. They could be a member of a particular group. Like if we look at you know, like the St. Lawrence String Quartet, or we look at the Beaux-Arts Trio or something like that, they tend to be quite exclusive to the group that they play in. And
does that make the flute more special as an instrument, if you have to always be collaborating, always moving from one ensemble to another?
I would say it just makes it more varied, that you certainly need to be able to collaborate with a number of different instruments happily. And it tends to be the case with the flute that we don't appear as frequently on concert series. So in some ways you perhaps need to be a little more creative in your programming to offer something that is of interest.
Is there much repertoire for solo flute, in other words, flute on its own without anybody else involved?
There is quite an amount, actually. It's something that I've explored quite a bit because I think that the flute has a very special and wonderful sound on its own, which isn't heard very often. Perhaps the parameter that makes it a little difficult is that all the counterpoint, all the harmony needs to be implied. And so that puts certain restrictions on a composer who's writing for solo flute. But it also can give the opportunity for some very fabulous sounds, very beautiful sounds.
And one of the pieces you're playing for us tonight is a piece for solo flute, isn't it?
Yes, one of our great repertoire pieces, the Partita in A minor by Bach. Yeah.
Obviously on a flute you can only play one note at a time, and yet this piece by Bach that you're performing is sort of written in counterpoint, even though it's only in one part. So how did Bach do that?
Well, I suppose this shows really Bach's incredible mastery over counterpoint, in that he can suggest this incredibly rich contrapuntal texture with a single-voiced instrument. The sound of one note will stay in our ear as the other notes are played, and so you actually can create the sense of harmony through the way you shape the phrase, through the way you shape the notes. You can portray a sense of harmony even though the notes are never speaking at one time.
So it's sort of implied, if you like, the chords are there and the tune comes in every now and then a few notes from the chords.
That's right, so you'll hear the harmony, absolutely, even though the notes aren't being sounded together.
What kind of flute would Bach have had at his disposal in his time?
There would have been a number of wooden flutes and different flutes played for different pieces in different keys. But we would have been playing at that point on a wooden flute. In fact, I mean, the wooden flute has remained in some ways constant in different forms throughout the flute's evolution, and in fact a number of players of modern repertoire now and in orchestras today are going back to wooden flutes, which is very interesting.
Is that something you've ever considered doing?
I'm allergic to the wood, so.
Oh, okay.
It's a beautiful sound, very beautiful.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, that's as good a reason as any, I guess. Yeah. You're performing a piece by Saint-Saëns, which was not originally written for the flute. It's something that, have you arranged it yourself or one of your colleagues?
I transcribed it along with a pianist that I played with quite frequently when I lived in England. So the two of us did it together.
Did it transcribe well? Like, does the flute, because it's a piece of vocal music, isn't it? And does the flute and the vocal part, do they kind of mesh pretty much?
Very beautifully. Very beautifully. That's why I chose this particular aria. It's very difficult for the piano, though, I have to say, because they're basically fulfilling the part of the entire orchestra.
And where is the aria from?
This aria is from Saint-Saëns' opera Samson and Delilah. It's one of Delilah's great operas called Mon coeur s'ouvre à ta voix. And
what does that mean in English?
My heart opens at your voice.
So it's a very passionate piece.
It's she's being her most beguiling and her most she's, you know, the story of Samson and Delilah.
She's lying to him, essentially.
Basically, she's lying in the most beautiful way, and of course, she completely captivates him, to the downfall of a number of people, a great number of people. But there's something about this aria that gives you some insight into why he was captivated. I mean, it's very beautiful.
Now, when you're playing this on the flute, obviously the words aren't there, but does any of the content inform your performance or the emotions you feel when you perform it?
That's such an interesting question. Actually, Peter and I have spoken about this a lot because he also plays with singers a lot, and often, or at least there have been times when perhaps they're doing a song without necessarily knowing the words.
If it's in a foreign language.
If it's in a foreign language. Now, with a great composer, and so much lieder is written, or operatic music is written by just such gifted composers, the music speaks without the words. But to me, knowing the words helps me that much more to interpret what I want to do with the music. So I certainly think of the words when I'm playing this aria.
You're playing three pieces, or rather three movements, by Schumann, their romances. Why did you pick those for today's show?
These pieces are very, very simple in their structure, but extremely tender and beautiful in their emotional content. I find that for whatever reason, I find them very moving and a real pleasure to play.
The piece by Saint-Saëns you're playing is also about romance and love. Do you have a predisposition for playing music which touches on romantic issues?
I don't think that I necessarily do. What draws me into these pieces is the exquisite melodies that they contain, as does the Bach. The flute, to me, has such a very beautiful vocal singing sound, and so repertoire that allows that to come across is a great pleasure to play.
Leslie, it's been wonderful having you on the show. Thank you very much for joining me.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.
And thank you for watching. I'm Will Fraser, and remember, the future of classical music is now. Good night.